episode 35 of the Bithell Games Podcast. I'm Alexander Slawinski.
And I am Mike Bithell.
Each week we talk games, what it's like to make games, and the random stuff we don't get time to talk about because we are playing and or making games. Show note, we are recording this in a sound booth in New York City. New York City!
We're living the dream.
After Mike had probably the most exciting night of his life.
It was. I went to see the popular musical Hamilton. We were in the front row. I then went and had New York pizza. That was a pretty astonishing evening. I even had Hamilton beer in a Stein, not in a Stein, but like a big glass.
I believe it was Sam Adams in a Hamilton cup.
Exactly. And it was amazing.
Our guest on today's episode is Creighton DeSimone.
Whoa. I don't like this general tone of sarcasm with which you've introduced this fine gentleman.
What? Okay.
You picked up on the very subtle voice he did there, yes?
He mispronounced my name earlier, and I think he was trying to cover.
Because I called you Craig.
Yeah.
And I don't know how, because I've known you long enough to not do that at all. It's like you calling me Andrew.
Well, but I do that as a joke. And I even told you that. I took everything in my being not to call you Andrew when I emailed you
Welcome
a couple
to the
weeks
Bithell
ago.
Games Podcast.
The tension-filled Bithell Games Podcast. So you're both verified accounts on Twitter.
Yep, as I think anyone of value is right now. I mean, everyone's getting added on. Everyone's verified now, right?
So, Creighton, why are you verified on Twitter?
Oh, I'm verified on Twitter because I wrote Charles Barkley fanfic at TheVerge.com one time. I think that's why. But also, I have an IMDb page, so it proved that I'm a real boy.
Are you an actor?
No, I'm a producer.
What does that mean?
Video producer, commercial, music video, short film producer. Worked for College Humor, worked for TheVerge.com, freelanced, made a bunch of commercials that I'm sure everyone saw on television at some point.
What's a commercial that everyone's seen from you?
Ruffles commercial with Eric Decker, the football player. A bunch of Geico commercials. There was a Geico commercial with, there was a Bonnie and Clyde miniseries. And so there was a Geico commercial Bonnie and Clyde crossover thing.
Was the gecko in it?
The gecko was on a print ad in a magazine they were reading.
I like the gecko.
He was out of my price range. We did the budget Geico commercials, not the gecko, the high-end Geico commercials.
So what does being a producer entail in something that is not the video games industry?
That's a good question.
Because most people don't even know what a producer does within the video games industry.
I don't know. I don't know what a video games producer does, but I imagine it's logistics and dealing with money.
Is that what you do?
That's typically kind of like what I do, so I kind of just move it over. So for when I was a freelancer, I would get hired by production companies, and they would give me a finished script for a commercial or music video or something, and then I would execute on the script. So hiring the director, sometimes they already had a director, but bringing in everything, all the pieces, so on our shoot day or days, everything on the script could happen. Now I work for Condé Nast, and it's more documentary style, but it's still setting up the pieces for success, knowing that there's a treatment and making sure we can execute on the treatment. So it's a little more freeform. We were talking to Mike just yesterday. I don't know if we can talk about that.
Yeah.
Sure.
No. That's right. Yeah. So we're gonna go right into that. So the reason we're in New York is because we're filming a small little doc about VR and our work in VR.
Yep.
And so just go into a little bit about how this layers into the games industry, not necessarily like because it's a documentary series, but just when a game studio goes into the outside world and like hires someone like you to produce content for them, or when a studio or a commercial is hiring you to produce content for them, what are the things that you bring to the table that they wouldn't realize? So
there's a couple of ways to get to me or a producer, not necessarily me. The first is I have this idea and I want you to make this existing idea. And I've done a lot of that, and that's cool and I'm good at execution and logistics and I, have a very long Rolodex of people and places and things to, rent and contacts. And that's a lot of what you're getting with a good producer is who they can bring on to do all of the jobs. But other times they say, we want to make a video. We don't really know what we want. What do you have any ideas? And then it's more of like me time.
And then it's Creighton's big box of ideas.
Right. But yeah, it's like you try to figure out what are they trying to accomplish with the video, and you kind of work backwards.
Sure.
I was actually just talking to a charity recently who I said, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to get 1 million views out of one video, or do you want to get a bunch of videos to fill up your website so it looks impressive to donors? Because if that's the goal, that's fine, and we can do a bunch of interviews. They're going to get not a lot of views, but if you want the big, high spending donors to see, oh yeah, look at all these interviews with great people. That's wonderful. Yeah, they seem legit, and they are legit. They just are just getting a website. But if you're trying to, right. Yeah. But if you're trying to be like, the ice bucket challenge, if you're trying to do something crazy, then we got to think way outside the box. And they said they didn't know they weren't prepared for that question, which is fine. And they're going to talk about it and see what's more important to them. So we'll talk about what's the end goal and then work backwards. If the goal is to just show how this game was made so we can keep it on our website so we can try and get more work, that's cool. And we can make a cool documentary series about what it's like to make a video game, which is a lot of sitting at computers. It's true. I've been learning. And, figure out how to pull what's the outdoor metaphor to sitting at a computer. What can we do to make it visually interesting and compelling while still making it about developing the game that you're developing and not developing because, Bithell Games is developing games very differently than like a large AAA studio.
Sure. Absolutely.
So, Mike, one of the things that you mentioned to me last night when we saw Hamilton.
The popular Broadway musical Hamilton. So good, Alexander. Wasn't it good?
Yes, but you were really impressed with how professional the crew was and how well everything was executed.
On this shoot?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, because I don't know if we talked about this on the podcast, but my first career was an actor, much younger in life. I was a child actor. So I was on a lot of shoots growing up. And my understanding of shoots, I think I worked on a lot of bad shoots, basically, because things overran, people didn't know what they were doing. Bad producer, right? That's
bad producer.
Yeah, always with that stuff. Just someone who's not actually on top of what they're doing.
So what's the difference between the bad shoots that he was on and something that was incredibly professionally run? Like
this one has Craig.
Yes. No, I'm not going to lean into that. But yeah, genuinely, like if someone is hiring a producer and getting an outside producer to create some kind of series for their game, whether it's a doc, whether it's I mean, what are the things that a video game company would hire you for? Like, what are the different?
Sometimes it's a lot of documentary, but sometimes it's narrative stuff. Sometimes it's here's a short film version of like a prequel to a game. I did. Oh man, I totally forgot. You remember the game? What was the game? It was on Xbox 360. It was like purple and black, and you would like get absorb powers, and like your hand would be like an anvil or like an axe. Prototype?
Was it called
Prototype?
Yeah.
So we did. I worked at College Humor.
There's also the pilot to Transformers, but that's a whole other conversation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Prototype. They came to us and said we want to do like a comedy video about. With like, these are the powers, here's the game. We like played the game early, or we had a demo or something. I forget exactly what happened. This was so long ago. This is like 2008 probably, or 2009.
Yeah, with Prototype it would have been, yeah.
And we shot like a parody of Prototype because that's what they wanted. It was fully scripted. Whoever made the game, I can't even remember the studio. Was it an EA game maybe? Had approval over what the script was, and then we oversaw it, and we produced this like fully scripted 3-minute. I'm sure you can watch. I'm sure it's still up on College Humor.
It's funny because we did one volume, didn't we? We did or we did a live action trailer, less content, definitely not like 3 minutes, kind of closer to that minute and a half, which I had a really good experience. That was like a 1-day shoot, I think. We did that all in 1 day. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's another thing, like a fully scripted, just like, hey, we're gonna make fun of ourselves because these powers are ridiculous, or I think obviously something like Quantum Break is a whole other.
Oh, that's a
thing
whole. I mean, that's a television,
full-on television.
Yeah, that's a television show with a video game component.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So when someone is hiring a producer, what are some of the signs in your head that they've got a good producer, as compared to a little bit more? Not even budget, just sort of your red flags start going off. Like for me, like one of the things that sort of stood out is like we had a call sheet. We knew exactly like when we're supposed to show up. Right. There was all the logistics were. I knew exactly where Mike needed to be at every single point. Mm-hmm. We knew where the breaks were. We're actually taking advantage of a break right now in recording this. So is that that's obviously one of the indicators. Are there other ones that when you I'm guessing you've had to be a fixer in a couple situations.
Yeah.
So when you become a fixer, what usually caused that to happen?
So I think there's two things you were talking about. The first is when you're hiring someone, I like to look at all of their work, and I've ran video teams. I ran a video team at College Humor. I ran a video team at The Verge. I ran a video team here at Condé Nast before doing what I'm doing now. And I want to, when you're hiring people, when you're looking for video producers, the work might be not great, but I look for the little things in the work. It won't necessarily tell you how like the day ran, but if there are little pieces there, it's like, oh, you couldn't execute because maybe you didn't have the funds or the resources, or the subject matter was holding you back. One of my favorite hires used to shoot Broadway, that I hired for The Verge. He used to shoot Broadway lines like outside of theater and like interviews and stuff, and that's like, I don't want to watch that. That's probably not a person you'd want to hire. But I was watching little like time-lapse things that he interjected, or like the way the camera moved, and I was like, he has skill. Like I can see it. The format of what he's doing is wrong, and not, that's unfortunate. But he's got skill, and I hired him, and he's amazing. And I was super happy, and he's like, one of my favorite people I've ever hired. Hi, John. Anyway, so that's one thing when you're trying to hire a producer, and just look at the, if the producer has worked with a bunch of big, if it's a commercial thing, brands, and a bunch of different directors, he's probably good because he wouldn't keep finding new work. Like the list of brands I've worked with are a lot, with a bunch of different production companies, and people keep coming to me as when I was a freelancer. And so that, I think, speaks volumes of someone's like professionalism and keeping things organized and on time, because you just wouldn't keep getting commercial work if your stuff constantly ran over.
Is it a low survival field?
Yeah. You can't, especially for commercials and smaller stuff, you can't fail up. I feel like in Hollywood there's a lot of failing up the chain, but on like smaller things, on like, we were still doing relatively low budget commercials. Like a $200,000 commercial is just low budget for a commercial, which is not a small amount of money in the grand scheme of things, I understand, but is a low amount of money for a commercial, and you just won't get hired. The industry is too small, especially in New York.
So what is the advice that you would have to a game studio that is looking to do outside video production work?
Don't. No, I'm just kidding. I think look at some of their other similar work and know what you want. It's so much easier for me to make a client happy when they know what they want. Not necessarily like exactly what they want, but if they have a good idea of what they want out of a video, it's so much easier to work with them. If they're unsure and constantly changing their mind, well, then I start going one way and then, oh, you wanted this now. Oh, you had this other idea. And now it's like just picking up the pieces and you're just trying to get something out.
So, Mike, I'm curious your thoughts on this because actually our most heated discussions are typically about like me saying, this is what I want, this is the way I want it done. And you're saying, well, no, these are professionals.
You mean with art, when we're working with artists
Right.
and outside people, yeah.
So, I mean, when you hear him say something like that, what's your reaction? Or do you think it's a more nuanced response?
I think the key thing with any kind of external collaboration is working out what the third party wants. You know, in any conversation I'm having with someone who works external to a company, I'm going to find out how they like to work and I'm going to adjust accordingly. There's certainly people you work with outside who are like, I want you to come to me, Mike. I want you to tell me what you want so I can execute and get it done, and then everyone goes away happy. But you also get a lot of people who want much looser, much more room to work, much more room to kind of develop their own ideas and think things through. So for me, I don't think there is a right or a wrong way to work with external people beyond finding how they like to work and adjusting our approach, because we can adjust. And if we're talking to someone external, it's because we found someone who we respect and who we like what they're doing. And I'm always very worried about kind of clipping the wings of someone who's got this talent and this ability. So I always want to talk to them about how they want to do things. I know that's in a few of our conversations that's become difficult because that's something where maybe you want to keep more control or you have a really specific vision of what you want. But if we're working with the kind of person who I know will respond to the freedom to do what they want, I know they're going to come up with something better than us too. Because if we could execute this brilliant idea that's in our head, we wouldn't need them. And with a lot of creative people who we work with externally, the value they bring is not just literally can this person draw well or can this person animate. It's what ideas they're going to have, what experience they're going to have that they're going to bring to it. So it varies, but there are definitely people also who just want, we definitely have collaborators who just want me to send them the bullet point list of this is everything we need and just do it.
And now as Creighton takes a little break to check in with the crew, we are going to continue on with... What are you laughing about?
I just the way you said crew. It's just it was very... You're very down with the film industry. It's exciting to see.
Check in with the crew. What do you want from me? Anyway,
keep rolling.
As Creighton does that, we're going to talk about what's going on at the studio. What's going on, Mike?
We're obviously traveling a bit, but I guess the big thing is we're heading into alpha. On as of yet still unannounced.
So that's a pre-demo.
So alpha's an interesting one. I think it's one that players don't get to see often. I think people, what's the average consumer understanding of alpha? That they see pre-alpha on a trailer, right?
Yeah. So the issue is that over the last 10 years, as we know, the term beta has become synonymous with the term demo.
Sure.
And
which it's not, but we'll get to that in another episode.
I think that's another episode altogether. Sure. I think we need to wait for another true example of someone being like, this is our beta. And it's like...
and the world going, no, that's not right.
No, it's really not, though. But that's been going on for about 10 years now. Mm-hmm. But alpha is not something that gets talked about very much. So I would say we should start with what happens before alpha, and then obviously... beta comes next, but then let's define what the difference is from a really nerdy game development standpoint of what the difference is between an alpha and a beta.
Really nerdy is my middle name. Mike Really Nerdy Bithell. So I think, as people expect, game development is just basically a sequence of getting things made and putting them in.
Sitting in front of a computer.
Sitting in front of a computer. Typing away. Occasionally going outside to look wistfully at a building. As you'll be able to see in the filmmaking we've been involved in. It's looking really good. I don't know why I'm being cheeky. So it's you make a bunch of stuff, you iterate, and I think that's something that often gets missed, is that game development, ultimately you make a thing in steps. So if you're making, the example I always use is Pong, is if you wanted to make Pong, you would make a rectangle, and then you would make it so that rectangle moved back and forth as you press the keyboard, and then you'd make it another rectangle that went back and forth of its own volition, and then you make a ball, and then you make it so the ball moves up the screen, and then you make it so the ball bounces when it hits another paddle, and then you make it so it can bounce off the sides, and you slowly kind of iterate and tweak and add things to a game. And that's how you get to a game. Now, kind of pre-production on games can vary. Sometimes, massive game design documentation is written, and when you're working with hundreds of people, that's something that makes a lot of sense still. For us, we tend to be a bit looser, so we just kind of experiment and find what the game is and start building it up. But there is a very critical point in any game's development where you have to be a grown-up, and you have to basically go, okay, we've been playing with this idea, we've been making stuff, the artists have got started, things are being played with, but we need to lock it down, and we need to basically define the path from where we're at to the end of the project. And how that usually happens is that we define an alpha. So an alpha, in terms of like the official milestone explanation of an alpha, would be everything's in the game from a mechanical point of view. You can do everything in the game that's in the game, but everything's unpolished. So it's this idea of you can play the whole game, you can go from the first level to the 10th level, you can play everything through, you can see everything, do everything, but the art's really rubbish, and the voiceover is Bob in accounting.
Placeholder.
Exactly, who you've just kind of gotten into studio, which I actually need to go and record myself doing all the VO for the next project. But you have all of this stuff in, it's all working, it runs, but it's unpolished. And that's the traditional explanation of an alpha, is it's where you define, this is the game we're going to release. And then what happens after the alpha is you bring everything up to the polished level it needs to be, and then you go into beta and eventually release. So alpha is this place where the game is locked, effectively. You're saying, right, we're not going to add anything else to this game. We're going to bug fix, but this is the game.
This is the moment where Alexander comes to you and says things like, so would it be possible to do this? And you go, no, Alexander.
It would not be possible to do things like
That's called feature creep.
Now, of course, I mean, and you say feature creep, there's a reason feature creep exists as a word and is in common usage, just because, of course, lots of people break alphas and decide, well, we really need this, and we've all done it, and I probably will, on every game I ever release, quietly add a feature after alpha. It's not professional. It's like a lot of things, you set a rule so that when you break it, you feel bad, and you don't break it as many times as you could, essentially, right? And it works as a process. What's interesting from an external perspective with alpha and how I think it affects consumers is, you're often going to see pre-alpha footage in trailers. That basically means that the developer is reserving the right to change a feature or change the plan. This is obviously something that comes up a lot in the press around games, but games do change. You tweak something, you realize something's impossible, you realize something's too expensive and you haven't got the money, you realize something's going to take too long and you haven't got the time, and that's related to money.
And this is very different from the vertical slice conversation that we had a couple episodes.
Yeah, so a vertical slice is earlier. A vertical slice is basically you're defining the finish line. An alpha, I guess, is you're defining how you run. Like a vertical slice, you're specifically saying this is what we're aiming for as a finished product. Alpha's not about finished product. It's meant to be ugly. It's meant to be weird. It's meant to be broken. But it's all there, and everyone can gather around it and go, right, we are going to spend the rest of time of development on this game bringing this to release as it stands. We're not going to add a new level, we're not going to add a new character, we're not going to change the mechanics up too much. So alpha is kind of shorthand for defined, right? You're defining what the thing is. So it's interesting in terms of how that's used to explain to the consumer, often unsuccessfully, that games are a work in progress and that things will change. The other thing is often an alpha will coincide with a big update to the planned budget and timeline for a project, because an alpha, you'll often realize, if your alpha slips, if it's a bit delayed, you're going to realize it's slipped anyway, but B, you're going to know exactly at that point, because you've done a vertical slice, exactly how long it's going to take to finish the game, because you're going to look at it and you're going to go, right, we've got one animation like that and we need 10 more, so multiply it by 10, subtract a bit because we've defined that and the animation knows what they're doing now, so like we can speed it up a little bit. But you're defining that last sprint, which is why often when a game is announced as delayed, that happens shortly after the alpha, because that line has been hit, everyone's gone back to the spreadsheet, realised things don't quite add up, and then the game gets delayed. And that's usually, if you're seeing news of a delay, that's because they've just hit or they've just missed alpha. Because by that point, after that, you're kind of in free fall. You're kind of, the train's moving. Like the game, it's all ticking over quite nicely. There's very few surprises, hopefully, after alpha. Alpha, you should have defined everything. You should have done all the hard jobs. It should just be a case of plugging stuff in after that. So that's what alpha is.
And then what is the transition from alpha to beta?
So beta is where, beta is essentially meant to be the finished game. That's the ideal definition of a beta, is we think this is finished. And then obviously you spend the time between beta and release realizing all the ways you were wrong, and fixing all. So beta, you should be finished, but obviously there will be bugs after beta. There will be glitching and weird stuff, and that's where you fix that. Beta should be the kind of, we think we're finished. All your art's in, all your audio's in. Bob from accounting's been replaced by an actor, a real actor, and everything's kind of just ticking. And it should at that point feel pretty much finished. But that's the point where you go, we've got this bug, or can we get a better frame rate, or can we go to 1080p? It's that polishing finesse stage. Now, as players may guess from some games that get released, that beta can be delayed and can be very close to release on a game. And I've been in that position where you're kind of running to the finish line and you don't really get a beta that you can kind of lock down and say that. Certainly with Volume, for example, of a game that we hit that beta. We didn't really hit a beta. We kind of just ran to the finish line because we didn't have time. And that was fine, and we released a game that I'm very proud of in terms of it wasn't very buggy, it was quite polished at launch. But those little few remaining things, they got fixed, with updates and stuff. So I think it's a very valuable stage, but often a beta can be difficult to hit.
New York. Reader mail. I don't know.
Superb.
Actually, we sat in front of the post office last night for the Division.
Did.
The post office from the Division. Yeah.
No, the post office originally from New York, which their Division used.
Which is going to be a train station soon.
Is that right?
Is it?
Yeah, the post office uses like less than 10% of that building. And since they put, tragically, New York City, here's some New York City history with Creighton DeSimone. Tragically, we had a beautiful train station. It was Penn Station. It was gorgeous. It was beautiful. It was better looking than Grand Central. It was big, airy, giant windows, beautiful. And then they knocked it down and put Madison Square Garden on top of it, a big old sports complex, and the trains are underground, and it's not airy, and it's tight, and it's cramped, and it's way more people go through there than need to. But the trains,
it looks like an underground mall.
The trains run from where Madison Square Garden is all the way under the post office, because it's right next door. And so because the post office isn't using this giant old beautiful building anymore, or as much of it, they are just putting because the tracks just run underneath, they're just putting the hole to the tracks above that now instead of Madison Square Garden. It will be a years-long project to make that happen, but it will be much nicer to go to Penn Station.
Well, thank you for that little bit of history. Hi, Mike and Alexander. I'm making a pretty ambitious game, and to make it happen, I always think about, quote, extra features that I can add and should cut from my plan. By extra features, I mean features that are not that related to gameplay, that are usually present in AAA games, but a game could function without them. For example, features like... Oh, we're going to disagree on this one. For example, features like localization, Mac and Linux support, achievements, gamepad support, detailed options menu, rebindable keys, 21:9 aspect ratio, etc. In your opinion, what, quote, extra features can be cut down without noticeable negative impact on game sales and user satisfaction, and what extra features should be present in the game no matter what? That's from Andre.
Okay. So shall I have a run at it first?
Yeah.
Because I think I know where you're going to come down on some of this stuff. So I think the key thing here is to say that everything that was just listed is stuff that is a reasonable expectation from players and something that you're probably going to want to add to the game at some point. What I would suggest here is prioritization. It's what do I need to get into the game on day one, and what can I maybe kind of expand the game later. So I would say that things like localization should be there from the start. There should be some localization in terms of language support for key languages that you think are important, or putting in at least the hook. So maybe you can have user-generated localization. That's a possibility as well. There are other things you listed in terms of porting it to different platforms, like Mac and Linux, and
the achievements.
Achievements you have to have.
Right, you have to.
You have to.
There's several things on here that are non-negotiable.
Yeah, so I would say the porting to Mac and Linux and the resolutions stuff, that's stuff that you could absolutely add later. And what's great about adding these things later is you get a news story. So, if you release the Mac version a month after release, that's news. That can be a story that can generate more people coming in and checking out your game. Players are generally quite forgiving and understanding of the fact that porting does take time, and you can get to that later. But I would say that there is certainly an expectation amongst players for their achievements or trophies. I mean, I guess we're talking about PC, so they're kind of the Steam achievements to be in the game. Your Steam badges, your Steam everything basically plugged into the API. I would say localization. For a small game, you might be able to scrape through without localization. This is an area I think we might disagree on. I think you could launch. I mean, Thomas Was Alone definitely launched without localization on PC. Thomas Was Alone has no localization, which is something we should probably look at some point. But I think the achievement side, the platform specific side, I would focus on making the best possible PC game you can, and maybe getting to the ports later.
Creighton, from your perspective as a player, what are some of those things that just got listed that
you think a game has to have?
You think a game has to have?
Well, I think it needs Mac support.
Because you have a Mac.
Well, no, because Mac sales, Windows sales, obviously way outpacing Mac sales. But for regular consumers, they have Macs, and so if your game is a smaller title, you want people to play it.
Yeah, even though it's just 10% of your sales, it's still 10% of your sales.
But I think it's probably more than that, because is it not? Is it that little?
It's not. I would say that you're hitting on an interesting point, because there's definitely a hardcore gamer audience. Definitely will predominantly have PC.
They'll build their own computer.
They'll build their own PC, and it'll be something for their platforms. What's interesting is so far we're not seeing an amazing amount of sales of paid for games on Mac that you would think there would be, because, as you say, so many people just as consumers own Macs.
Yeah.
But those people don't seem to be playing, at least from our data, gamer games, the kind of
right.
So if this is someone making a platformer or a shooter or something that's more if they're making something that's a bit more kind of general audience, maybe free to play, maybe more puzzly, something that appeals to a broader audience, then I think you're probably right. I think that probably does skew towards Mac, but we've certainly, even with Thomas Was Alone, I think it is pretty steady at 10%.
It's 10%.
Yeah.
That was the only one that jumped out to me, just because I think about.
Because that's your use case.
But right? I think of other people I know just have Macs, and it would be great to play smaller games that aren't,
What's your take on
shooters.
Gamepads for PC titles or for?
I love a controller.
Yeah.
I love a controller. I grew up a console kid, so.
It's technically challenging.
Controller support's great if you can do it.
Yeah, I can understand. I mean, it does. It's certainly something that Volume we had to work very hard to get that at the kind of the over the finish line.
And I did all that testing.
You did with your PC, because I'm a Mac guy. I think definitely launching with Xbox 360 and Xbox One controller support makes sense, and you will find that is something that your core PC audience definitely, I think, assume that, especially if you're making a game which is traditionally suited to that. If you're making something like a text adventure game or a mouse-based puzzle game, I think you can maybe get away without that straight off the bat. But if you're making anything that's in kind of an action or sports or platforming genre, I think...
No, I mean, for me, like Stardew Valley, it works with the controller. It's fantastic.
But I think Stardew Valley is a game, as an example of a game I think you could probably get away without doing controller support from day one. Is that fair?
I mean, you could, but then... my comparison in this line of thinking is then I look at like XCOM 2, and it did not have controller support, and it had Steam controller support, but not Xbox 360 controller support or Xbox One, and that was weird. That was just weird.
Yeah, I think we're all agreed that basically everything on that list is a valid and useful thing to add. But I think controller is something that you could wait, and unless you're a game, I think the key thing here is if this is an indie game and you're starting out and you've not got many players kind of hearing about the game yet or buzz filled up, I think you can slide into that over time, and as long as you explain to players, you put a list on the forum that says these are the features I'm planning to add, as post launch, then I think players will respond well to that.
Yeah, in terms of localization, if you're coming out just on PC, yeah, you can just stick with English, and you should be okay. If you are going on consoles, you have no choice. There is an expectation, and so in that case, it's generally just called EFIGs, English, French, Italian, German, and Spanish. Then you would strongly consider Brazilian Portuguese. Then you also have to deal in terms of localization between Mexican Spanish and Spanish Spanish. And then there's even the question of, do you even put in Italian, because the numbers just don't indicate that support. But it is still a thing that exists.
You start going Polish, Russian.
Yeah, so like for us, it was very much EFIGs plus Polish and Russian. That was almost not a question.
Into Chinese.
Yep, Chinese, Japanese. Yep, where we're starting to fill in the Asian languages and looking at the market. And I mean, that's the beautiful thing about Steam. You get to see where everyone's coming from or where the interest is, and you go from there. Creighton, any other features that just you expect to be there, or like you get bummed out when they're just not there?
No, the Mac support, I can't tell you how many times I've gone and opened up Steam and been like, it's not on. I have no way to play this game. Cool.
If you have a burning question about games, game development, or just about the complexities of life, you can send those questions to us via contact at bithellgames.com. I'm terrible at this.
You are terrible.
Though through the YouTube comments or on Twitter, here we go again, by pinging the verified at Mike Bithell.
Thank you.
The non-verified at Slewinski, or at Volume Game. Or if you have questions about production, you can also contact the verified Creighton DeSimone.
At Sensible Madman on Twitter.
Yeah, that's what it's like. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bithell Games Podcast. We can always use your support, so please provide us 5 stars on iTunes, likes and subscribes on YouTube, and positive reinforcement whenever possible. This podcast was produced by Jonathan Downen. I'm Alexander Slewinski. Thanks again for joining us, Creighton.
Thank you for having me.
And get in the last word, Mike.
Hamilton.